Dad, nice to see you. I thought today we would continue with I believe it's part 7. Oh, I have to keep track of these, But part 7 of our book, the Tender Bucket and Me, and I thought we'd continue from where we left off. If you remember, Emma was having some trouble with the Wendy house, and paper mache the bathroom toilet and flooded the place. And they were getting ready to go away. So here we go now. We'll go straight into it. I hope you like the intro and the outro, and I hope you like this book and me reading to you. I'm Ledger with my Poppy and my Colin with me as well. And if you do, please like and subscribe and share the video, because then we can bring more people round to our place where we can just settle down and chill out and not have to think about anything for a while except to just delve into the book. All right? Thank you, my lovelies. It's much appreciated. And welcome to the new subscribers. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Welsh Lady's place. Okay, so we finished it off, and here we go. We start again now, like this. The journey up the endless A1 to Newcastle was surprisingly dull. The landscape was bland and monotonous, and there was nothing of particular interest to look out for. Dad, as ever, kept us going with regular renditions of that year's holiday song, Alice Cooper's School's Out. Oh, I love that song. I do. Which my mother unusually sang along to with immense enthusiasm. Oh, Brenda likes it too. She particularly liked the bit about school being out forever. That's right, because Brenda's a teacher, isn't she? Which she would just sing along to at the top of her voice, but would follow up with a punch to the air and an occasional, ooh, just imagine, Tony, wouldn't that be lovely? Other than that, the only thing to spice up another otherwise boring trip was the presence of the special treat, sausage sandwiches. Oh, gotta love sausage sandwiches, chat. Sausage sandwiches that had been bought from the Greasy Spoon Cafe in the Glebe shopping centre that morning. They had been sitting wrapped in greaseproof paper and wafting their olfactory delights in our direction ever since. Oh, nice to think of that, you smelling sausages as you're travelling. Sometimes, we eat them cold, put them in sandwiches. We had stopped somewhere. There's nothing like this. Nothing different to the little ones you have, the little ones on the sticks. Cocktail sausages. That's the ones I was thinking of. But yeah, to have real cold cocktail. No, not real cold. See, you got cocktail in my head now. Real cold sandwiches in real cold sandwiches. What am I saying, chap? My brain's not in gear yet. Come on now, brain man. Work. Cold, long sausages. Oh, chat. I don't mean that. Normal sausage size sandwiches. Right, moving on from the sandwiches, it's getting me into trouble. Somewhere just north of Melton Mowbray, where they make the pork pies my father had told us over and over, and parked up in a lay-by where we had unwrapped the sausage sandwiches with an almost religious devotion. We then sat grinning like loons, sinking our teeth into the doorsteps of buttered white bread filled with crisp, skinny, herby bangers. Bangers of mash. There's no mash in your mind. Bangers smothered in brown sauce. It was to be the highlight of the holiday, but we didn't know that then. We were heading into unknown waters and the bleak moors of Northumberland. It was another adventure. My mother, from whom the north was somewhere you only went to in an emergency, like the imminent death of a much-loved relative, oh gosh, had her suspicions that our holiday was going to be another calamity. Well, Brenda's no wrong, they usually are. But surely she had reasoned with herself. We couldn't have 3 shit holidays in a row. And besides, even though the prospect of a holiday up north was a swell of disappointment, at least she'd be visiting her friend from university, and that, and only that, was sweetening the pill. No, she had decided everything this year was going to be fine. We were going to stay with my mother's friend Jenny, who had been something of a partner in crime during my mother's younger, more excessive years. Oh, Brenda's secrets are going to start coming out now. I hope anyway. After university, the two had gone their separate ways. Mum had come to the south to start teaching, and Jenny had gone north to marry a man called Tim, a bookish fellow who smoked a pipe and was so serious about it that he kept the tobacco in a ceramic jar. They were an odd-looking couple. Jenny was tall with bird-like feathers. Bird-like feathers? Okay. No. Chat. The brain definitely don't want to work today. I'm trying. She doesn't have bird-like feathers. She has bird-like features. Oh dear. We're not off to a good start. But you know me, I don't edit. We just go with the flow. But next time you see someone with bird-like features, don't say bird-like feathers. So she had bird-like features. Whereas Tim was a stout, solid man whose face might have looked cherubic, if not for the compulsory early 1970s man beard that rubber-stamped his academic status. My mother didn't care much for Tim, but that was because he was forever staring at her tits. Oh. Eyes up here, Tim. Eyes up here. But then, in 1972, that's what all men did. They still do. Of course, but in those days, they didn't have to pretend that they weren't. Britain, 2 years into the decade that promised new horizons and opportunities, was struggling. We had begun the year under a cloud of social unrest, and as we drove into Newcastle, it was a stark reminder that extreme poverty was rife. Slum clearance was in full stride, and we drove past street after street of boarded-up houses, condemned communities broken up by local councils and forced into the new concrete high-rise estates. Acres of land had been flattened, only the pavements remained, arterial reminders of what had been, and street lamps stood abandoned in scrubland, once full of houses where families had lived next to each other for generations. Oh, and that's sad. That's sad, that is. This was the regeneration of the north, a scattering to the winds. I don't think I'd ever seen anywhere lonelier. Oh, that is so sad. Very, very sad. Jenny and Tim lived in a Victorian terrace that, because it had nice bay windows, had been saved from the developer's blitzkrieg. Yeah, I'd call it a blitzkrieg and all. Their house was the last in the row, a delightful red-bricked curiosity with a small garden in the front and steps up to the front door. "This is nice," said my mother, as we stayed up at it, and it was from the outside. When lives are on the cusp of crumbling, the first thing to be thrown out the window is a sense of order, and as we walked into the house there was an unnerving atmosphere of impending doom. Oh gosh. The interior was a total tip. Plastic bags filled with larger tins. Right, I don't know what is wrong with me today, chat, right? But you can have to bear with me. They're not larger tins, they're lager, as in beer, tins. I probably create the thumbnail for this with all the things I'm saying wrong. Oh, right. Don't know what it is, man. Am I getting a migraine, maybe? Who knows? But we'll continue on, yeah? We'd like a little laugh, and I can laugh at myself, so, it's okay to laugh. So, it's a tip, right? So there's plastic bags filled with lager tins, real ale bottles, clothes, books and newspapers were everywhere. The carpet was covered in clumps of wispy detritus and dirty dust mice that clogged up the corners, while ashtrays full to bursting were balanced on every available surface. Oh, can you imagine the smell? Oh. Jenny, who had the look of someone past caring, was distracted and drawn. "How was the journey?" she asked, as she led us into the kitchen. "Not too bad," said Tony, putting his hand onto a work surface and straight into a pool of marmalade. "Oh, I've just... never mind." We had been travelling for 6 hours, and that delicious sausage sandwich aside, we had nothing to eat or drink. In normal circumstances, it would be reasonable to expect a cup of tea or a glass of squash, followed up with something solid like an evening meal. But Jenny, who was more interested in staring out the window than seeing to a guest, just stood and made 2 slices of toast, spread them with stalk margarine, and then ate them as we gazed on. Oh, she didn't even share. We had clearly entered into some sort of domestic hell. "Something's not right," whispered my mother when Jenny left the room to answer the phone. "Let's suggest we go to the pub or something. Then we can get something to eat," my father nodded silently. "Yeah, that's always the way, innit? When we're a bit hungry. And, I tell you all, let's find a pub. Yeah, and we'll have a little pub lunch." And so, "Tim's on his way," Jenny said, coming back into the kitchen. "I don't know what he's been doing or where he's been." An awkward silence filled the room. My father, never one for appreciating the subtle requirements of the female species, cleared his throat. "Malcolm MacDonald's been a great signing for Newcastle, hasn't he?" said with a nod. "Lots of goals this season." Just a man bring up the football. No one knew what he was talking about, so we all ignored him. Sounds about right. Is everything all right, Jenny? Asked my mother, moving in to take hand. Is there anything you want to tell me? Jenny, looking down at my mother's hand in hers, went very quiet, and then, with a significant heave of the shoulders, started crying like a wounded animal. "Oh," said my dad, bundling me out of the room. "Let's go for a little walk. Let's leave Mummy and Jenny to have a chat." "Why is Jenny crying?" I asked. As we left the house, "Is she upset?" "I expect so," said my dad, zipping up his jacket with purpose. "I think we should try and find a fish and chip shop, don't you?" "Fish and chips!" I yelled, throwing my arms in the air. "Fish and chips!" Fish and chips were always worthy of a victory dance. As far as I was concerned, we weren't allowed them at home because my mother thought they destroyed our middle-class aspirations. But whenever we were away from home, the fish and chips bylaw did not apply. Good. When we were away from home, we could fill our boots with fish and chips. Sometimes we could even have scampi, which to me was as glorious a meal as you could get. But in Stevenage, fish and chips were forbidden. Even so, Dad and I loved fish and chips. Would sometimes sneak down to the local shop, buy a bag of thick, salty, vinegar-soaked chips, and then stand in the forbidden concrete underpass and eat them before returning home. "Aw, you know, Dad, lovely. Well done, Tony." You know, he's like, "Come on, let's have some fish and chips, just me and my girl." Isn't that lovely? We would giggle and nudge each other because we couldn't believe how naughty we were being, and the chips were all the tastier for their illicit pleasure. Because we didn't know where we were, Dad decided we would have a quick drive round to see if we could find some shops. But we had barely got to the end of the street before we came to a screeching halt. Tony, winding down his window, shouted, "Tim!" and waved in the direction of a man with a pipe in his mouth. The man plodded over to us and thrust a hairy arm in through the window to shake my father by the hand. "That Emma?" he asked, pointing his pipe at me. "Haven't you grown? Where are you going?" "Going to find some fish and chips," explained Dad. "Fish and chips," I cheered, waving my hands in the air. "Brenda's with Jenny. They're having a chat," added my dad, whispering the last bit in man code. So it's probably gone like, "They're having a chat," like that. Yeah. Tim stood upright and gave that matter a small think. "Tell you what," began Tim. "If you're going to the chip shop, you wouldn't mind dropping me off on the way, would you? Just got to drop something off with a colleague. Then we can, pick up the chips and come back. It's not far out the way. It won't take long." It was rare that I ever found myself in adult male company, and as Dad and Tim chatted in the front of the car, I quickly ascertained that I didn't have the first clue what they were talking about. Wait till you grow up, Emma. Oh, there's no men bashing you. We like the 30% that is who follows my channel. According to them, best was off form. Supermark was a godsend, and there was a new club opened in Newcastle where you could see something called Deep Throat at lunchtime. So cool. Goodness me. But for some reason, it was probably best not to mention that in front of the wives. Tim, who had continued puffing on his pipe in the car, even though all the windows were wound up. Oh, no. God, see us back in those days. Nobody thought about it. We think about it now. a pipe going and then all the windows are up and she's in the car breathing in that second-hand smoke. Oh no. But back then, that's how it was, in the 70s. So, like I said, she was allowed to even stand up in the back seat, you know. I didn't even know if seatbelts were a thing, were they? But for some reason, it was probably best not to mention it for the wives. Tim would continue puffing on the pipe in the back car, even though all windows were wound up. Was not someone I felt instantly drawn to. There was something slightly unsavoury about him, like a damp rag that you find hidden behind a toilet. Yeah, how does that damp rag get behind the toilet? You find one there, don't I? From leftover cleaning. Oh. If you just take this next left and park up by the second house on the right, he said, gesturing with his smoking pipe, that'll be grand, I won't be long. We had pulled up outside a large 1950s style semi. Right, semi-detached house, which means two houses attached together but completely separated by wall, basically. Detached is just one house on its own. I know why I might be explaining that to people who think why, but it's because I heard before that nobody did terraced houses, and so I had to explain those, so I thought I'd best explain them as well. So there was a low wall at the front, and behind it, oh, excuse me, for my sneezing. I hope I don't have a sneezing fit now, man. If I do, I'll pause and I'll come back to you. Oh, I think I'm gonna hang a bang, chat. Hang a bang. Okay, I think I'm okay now. Bit of a sneezing fit, but I think I'm okay. Thanks for bearing with me. I just paused for a moment. Okay, so there was a low wall at the front, and behind it was a well-kept lawn that stretched about 25 metres to the front of the house. There was a large tree to the left, and where we were parked, we could see straight into the lounge. A woman with voluminous curly blonde hair had answered the door, and as Tim disappeared inside, I asked who she was. Someone Tim works with, I think, said Dad, who was staring in the direction of the lounge. Following his eye line, I turned to look as well. Tim and the woman were now standing in the lounge talking, but as we watched, the woman put her arms around Tim's neck, and right before our very eyes, they started kissing. Jesus Christ, said my dad, gripping the steering wheel. Jesus Christ, what the hell is going on here? They're kissing, Daddy, I said, by the way of explanation. Oh, Jesus, my dad, putting a hand to his forehead. Oh, he just repeats it. Jesus, don't look, Emma. Oh, Jesus. I think he's praying, okay? He's not blaspheming. We're not going to say he's blaspheming. He's praying. He's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? My father, terrified that he had found himself implicated in a marital indiscretion, stared into the lounge with incredulity and slumped his forehead onto the steering wheel. A small, indefinable moan seeped out from the corner of his wife. Why is he kissing that lady? I asked, staring. Is that his job? But my father didn't answer. He was still emitting involuntary whimpers. Tim, meanwhile, had now finished his kissing and was now caressing the woman's face. Because my father had put his head down, I felt duty-bound to provide a running commentary. He stopped kissing now. They're talking now. Oh, they are kissing again. They've stopped again. I can't see them now. The front door is opening. He's coming, Daddy. He's coming back to the car now. Tim, far from being bashful or coy, was beaming from ear to ear. Ah, he said as he leapt into the car. That's better. Now then, chips. My dad, who had previously been full of manly chat, was now projecting the silent demeanour of a man shocked to his core. Tim blathered on as if nothing untoward had taken place, as my father's head bowed, was ignoring him as best as he could. Whichever way you cut it, this was sticky business, and my dad, who was physically incapable of keeping anything from my mother, knew that he was going to have to squeal like a canary. And as soon as we got back, I, on the other hand, was just thinking about the chips and the tartar sauce, but mostly just about the chips. Fish and chips, I sang as we walked back in through the front door, arms full of our paper-wrapped supper. Mum and Jenny were still in the kitchen, but on hearing us arrive, Mum came out into the hallway. Hello, Brenda, bellowed Tim, grabbing her and pulling her to him. Let me feel your tits. Are I joking? I just slapped him, man. We got fish and chips. I've got some bottles of ale in the fridge. I'll crack a few open. Thank you, Tim, said my mother, pulling herself to a safe distance. Jenny's in the kitchen. You might want to see her. Boo-hooing again, asked Tim with a revolting grin. What is it with you women? Always bloody crying, eh, Tony? My dad, who was painfully aware that my mother was watching him like a hawk, said nothing, but instead stayed at the top of the banister and chewed his lip. As Tim sauntered off to the kitchen, my mother threw her hands up and rolled her eyes. In our absence, the shit had clearly been hitting the fan. Did you have fun, she asked, taking the tangy parcel from me. Yes, I said, with a vigorous nod. We went to the fish and chip shop, and I watched them put the fish in the oil, and there was a big jar full of eggs, and we saw Tim and a lady. Yes, interjected my father, gripping me by the shoulder. I just need to take Emma upstairs to wash her hands, Brenda. Why don't you put the fish and chips down and then help me wash Emma's hands? My mother threw my father a quizzical look. But she can wash her own hands. She's big enough now. My father rooted to the spot, widened his eyes to the size of saucers, and gestured urgently up the stairs. Come on, he said through gritted teeth. Let's all wash our hands, all of us. My mother, still not comprehending what my dad was getting at, looked at him, screwed her face up and said, I don't need to wash my hands, but you want about? Just get upstairs, my dad whispered at speed, and because my mother had still not grasped the urgency of the matter, mouthed something incomprehensible but dangerously looking. Bundling us both into the bathroom and locking the door, my father spun on his heels and said, Jesus Christ, Brenda, this is awful. You won't believe what we've just seen. The jar of eggs was massive, I said, holding my arms out. It was this big. She's on about the pickled eggs. They're always in the fish and chip shops over here, pickled eggs. We bumped into Tim, blurted on my dad, ignoring me. and he asked me to drive him round to this woman's house. He said he had to drop something off, and I thought it was something to do with work. And he goes in, and we could see everything from the car. And the only bloody goes inside and starts kissing her. We saw the whole thing. Emma saw it too. What? Said my mother, leaning back on the sink. He was bloody kissing her, Brenda. I didn't know what to do, and Emma saw it. You saw it, didn't you? Tim was kissing a lady inside the house. Can we have fish and chips now? What are we going to do? Whispered Dad. Oh no, said my mother, head dropping down. This is terrible. I've just had her sobbing ever since you left. She thinks he's having an affair. What a bastard. What a bloody bastard. Do you think I should tell her? Do you think I should do that? You can't, said Dad, shaking his head. We've only just got here. And what are we going to do about this one? My dad stopped and nodded in my direction. You know what she's like for blurting things out? My mother stood up and pointed a very strict finger. Emma, she began, leaning over me, you and your father did not see Tim kissing another woman. Do you understand? But I did see them, I replied, not understanding one little bit. They kissed for ages. No, said my mother, in the voice she's reserved for cataclysmic occasions, you did not see them. And if anyone else asks you about it, you just say nothing, or you'll be in a lot of trouble. Oh, poor Emma. Lot of trouble, said my dad in agreement. I looked at my parents. Adults I was forced to collude were quite mad. My mother was pacing, said again, I think I should tell her. Seriously, it's the right thing to do. I can't know and not tell her. I'm going to have to tell her. Brenda, squealed my father, holding her by the forearm. You just can't. We've only been here an hour. We can't drive for 6 hours and pack and say, oh, by the way, Tim's shagging some big-breasted woman with a tidy garden. No, I just suppose you can't, can you? Big-breasted woman with a tidy garden, eh? Oh, no, Chad, stop it. Don't laugh with me. It's making me laugh too much. Thinking. We just can't. It's none of our business. I can't believe he did that to me. Got me to drive him round there, cheeky bastard. My mother nodded. I had to take my hat off. My dad had played a blinder. By rolling out the carpet of moral outrage, his back was well and truly covered. All right, said my mum with a sigh, but I don't like it one bit. One bit. An atmosphere not unlike the Arctic presided over supper. There is nothing worse than being at someone's house when they need to have a blazing row and break some china, but can't because you were there. My mother, in an attempt to get everyone thinking about something else, suggested that we all go out for a drink. So we found ourselves 10 minutes later standing outside a large Victorian pub. The interior was beautiful. On one wall, huge floor-to-ceiling mirrors etched with scenes of merry excess, fawns holding cups aloft, and scantily clad nymphs lolling on grapevines. Dark mahogany panelling hemmed into the rest of the room, and plump, generous leather easy chairs gave the saloon an inviting, comfortable finish. Inviting and comfortable, that is, if you were a man. As we stood surveying the room, a man in a flat cap was staring at my mother as if she'd stepped off a spaceship. Nah, he said, I can't be doing Geordie accents, right? I love the Geordie accent. It's beautiful. And of course they're in Newcastle, so Geordie accent. I love it, but I can't do it. I just don't do accents very well. Just my own. But he's going to make me say words and it's probably not going to even sound at all Geordie. Okay. Nah, he said in a broad Geordie accent. No women here, like, off you go, pet. Here's men's only. Pardon, said my mother. Hadn't quite caught that. No women, said the man again. You're not allowed. Not allowed, said my mother in a high tone. Not allowed? This is 1972, not 1872. It's men only, Brenda, said Tim, pulling on her elbow. We'll have to go. Oh, I'm not going anyway, announced my mother, pulling away and straight into the bar. I will have half a pint of Guinness, please, 2 pints of ale, a gin and tonic, and what do you want, Emma? Baby sham, I said, because I liked the leaping deer on the bottle. I did too. I used to love the little leaping deer on the baby sham bottles. No, you can't have that, said Dad, shaking his head. That's got alcohol in it. But you let me have it at home, I said, frowning. Shh, said Dad. We were allowed a sip. Because a storm was bubbling at the bar and he might have to punch someone. Can I serve women, pet? Oh, can he serve women, pet? That's more like Scottish. Said the barman, polishing his pint glass. Men only. My mother, fixing the barman with a stare that could atrophy a walrus at 20 paces, rose to her full height. I would like, she repeated with a voice of steel, to be served some drinks. I am not a second-class citizen, and I demand to be served. As all the men in the bar stared at her, there was something electric and dangerous in the air. Hostility bristled all about us, and my dad, sensing that we might be about to get ourselves into a bit of bother, pulled me by the shoulders and shoved me to the back of him. The barman, who was still polishing the pint glass as if it was a loaded weapon, remained resolute. Look, pet, he began, leaning his considerable barrel frame forwards. This here is a men-only bar. If you want a drink, you'll have to go somewhere else. Spurred on by my mother's stand for female liberation, Jenny, who had barely said boo to a goose all evening, thrust herself forward. And I want to drink too, she shouted. Why shouldn't we have a drink? You're all bastards. Ooh, said my dad, squeezing me tighter to him and edging towards the door. A small cacophony of guffaws burst out around the room. You got a hellcat there, man, yelled out a thin fellow sitting at the far end of the bar, while another man shouted, You're not in London now, pet. Get home, where you should be. Tim, sensing that matters were turning ugly, took both Jenny and Brenda by the arms. Come on, he said, with a false bonhomie. There's no point, not up here. They'll not serve you. Let's go. Who wants to drink here anyway? My mother, refusing to concede defeat, turned as they got to the door. You're all dinosaurs, she yelled. Ignorant dinosaurs. And with that, she slammed the saloon door behind her. That was a bit steep, laughed Tim, as my mother puffed with rage. You, said my mother, pointing her very sharp finger into Tim's face, don't you speak to me, or we shall all be very sorry. And as for you, she continued, turning to my father, don't even think about saying anything. Come on, Jenny. Fuck the lot of them. Brenda gets angry and drops the F-bombs. Apologies. But she angry. Yeah, why shouldn't we be? Oh, there's still clubs like that, you know, that not mainly clubs, not pubs, but not nightclubs, but clubs as in like, the bowling club or the club that might not, it's better now, have a men's only bar, you know. And yeah, but then the men are allowed in the women's bar, so it's not treated equally, you know. Anyway, I just stared at my mother in awe. She had provided a textbook display of raw female courage. I don't think I'd ever been more impressed. In retrospect, it was a terrible idea to ask Jenny and Tim to join us on the morning excursion to Adrian's Wall. We were going to Chesterholm, to the Vindolanda fort, where I would receive a fast-track education on the Roman invasion of Britain and witness the bare-knuckle destruction of disintegrating marriage. For us, Adrian's Walls was a convenient stopping point to break up our drive into Northumberland, but for Jenny and Tim, it was to be a simple full stop. Okay. The weather was virgin on bleak. We had got up to heavy leaden skies and wind whining through the rooftops. As we left Newcastle, the grumbling day worsened, and by the time we got to Chesterholm, the skies were heavy and begrudging. Not only that, but it was clear that Jenny and Tim had done nothing but argue from the moment we were out of earshot. Jenny's face was tear-stained, her eyes red and puffy. My mother, flushed with sisterly solidarity, took Jenny by the arm and marched off, telling Tim he was a bastard. As she went, Tim, pipe in mouth, popped open the boot of his car, got out 10 bottles of Newcastle brown ale, and then informed my father that he was going to drink the lot and unalive himself. It was going to be an interesting day. Tony, who was trying to pretend that none of this was happening, decided to concentrate on me. "Let's pretend we're Roman soldiers," he said, as we scrambled up a steep bank to walk along the wall. The landscape was startling. The wall itself, Hadrian's glorious attempt to keep back the barbarians, slithered off as far as I could see, and off to our right, an expanse of moorland rolled away to the Cheviot lanes in the Cheviot hills in the distance. The weather had imbued everything with a dreadful boding. If you can hear a hairdryer in the background, that's my daughter. She's on her way out tonight, she is. Just, if you can hear it, she'll stop soon. The weather had imbued everything with a dreadful boding. The sense of menace increased by the presence of fat, cawing crows that perched jealously on the wall's ridge and strutted on the ground before me. The wind, which was more intense out in the open, buffeted through my hair and spiked my cheeks to rosy peaks. "So this is the wall that Emperor Hadrian built," began my dad, "and he was a Roman, and Britain was part of the Roman Empire." "Is this a Roman wall?" I asked, pointing at it. "Yes," said Tony, "and Roman soldiers used to march along here shouting, 'Sinister Dexter, Sinister Dexter.' That means left, right. You know, like when soldiers are marching. Sinister Dexter, Sinister Dexter." As Dad was speaking, he was striding backwards and forwards as if he were a Roman legion. I think he was enjoying it more than I was. "Is that a Roman crow?" I asked, pointing up to a particularly fat one. "Is that a Roman stone? Is that a Roman grass? It's all Roman. Sinister Dexter, Sinister Dexter." "Tony," said a voice behind us. "What are you doing?" It was my mother. She looked anxious. "We were pretending to be Roman soldiers," Tony, smiling, said. "Daddy's pretending," I corrected. "I'm not." "This is a bloody nightmare," said my mother with a sigh. "Jenny's in bits. I can't say anything about you-know-what. It's just awful, awful. Where's Tim?" "In the car park, drinking himself into an oblivion. I thought it best to leave it there." You can't just let him do that, said my mother, voice going up a notch. That'll make just matters worse. Go and get him and walk him around. Jenny's in the loo. I think we should all walk the old thing off. Calm everyone down. My father sighed and stared off into the billowing moorland, the life dripping out of him. Do we have to get involved? Tony pleaded, turning back. Of course we have to get involved, gasped Brenda. We're already involved. Look, we'll walk along the wall. The fresh air will do everyone good, and then that's it. We can go off and leave them to it. My father, with one desperate glance up into the air, stuck his hands into his pockets and slouched off. I had clambered up onto a low part of the wall that was pointing off into the distance for no other reason than that I could. Just on the horizon I could see two figures, an adult and a child, weaving in our direction, but I didn't give them much thought. I was distracted by the crows. Normal birds would flap off if you came anywhere near them, not this lot. They were defiant and grouchy, hopping about with proprietorial arrogance. One of them was sitting right by my foot and cawing at me, its thick black beak snapping like a misanthropy. Come away from there, warned my mother, waving at me. Crows peck people's eyes out, giving half the chance to laugh. Gosh, Brenda. Alarmed, I jumped out and ran to my... No wonder she's alarmed. I would be and all. Alarmed, I jumped down and ran to my mother, grabbing her coat at its hem for extra safety. Jenny was now trudging her way up the sharp incline towards us. As desolate as the surroundings, her long thin frame bending in the wind. My mother, keen to regain an atmosphere of normality, launched into a rousing historical lecture. Now the Romans, she began, invaded Britain, and they marched all the way up here and stopped. And then because they didn't like the Scottish, they built this wall to keep them out. So this wall is sort of like the end of the Roman Empire garden. This is where the Roman Empire came to an end. Why didn't they like the Scottish? I asked, looking up. They were a bit rough, I expect. Oh, my Scots. They were a bit rough. Although both Roman and Scottish men wore skirts, so you'd think they'd have plenty to talk about, she said. Don't ever get married, Emma, said Jenny as she puffed away up to us. Oh, what horrid crows. They look like undertakers waiting for us all to die. Oh, what's the point, wailed Jenny suddenly. We're all going to get eaten by crows or maggots or worms, so I may as well be happy now. Except I'm not. I'm miserable. It's all that bastard's fault. He's a bastard. I'm going to be eaten by worms and he couldn't care less. But you're not going to get eaten by worms for ages, said my mother. Poor Emma, listening to all this, said my mother, putting an arm around her distraught friend and throwing a desperate look over her shoulder. Let's think about the Romans instead. That will be far more uplifting. My mother, increasingly exasperated, decided to battle on. And so the Romans had amphitheatres and gladiators, and they had lots of gods. And there was a god of war. He was called Mars, and a god that just sent messages. He was called Mercury, and they had a god of love called Cupid. And he used to shoot arrows into people which would make them fall in love. Jenny let out a dirty guttural sob. In fact, they had a god for just about everything. Did they have a god for shoes, I asked. Probably, said my mum. And the gods used to play tricks on the humans, and they would sit in their house, which was a big castle at the top of Mount Olympus, and they would think up naughty things to do to people and give them impossible tasks and throw things in their way to trip them up. Oh wait, was Olympus the Roman gods or was it the Greek gods? I always get them mixed up. Leave the history lesson to Tony Brenda, I reckon. What do you think? The temperature had dropped and a bruised purple crept across the skyline, darkening the landscape and giving off a weird, unsettling light. Dad, who had somehow managed to persuade Tim not to go down in a blaze of alcoholic glory, was heading towards us along the ridge, Tim in disgruntled tow. Jenny had settled herself against the wall, leaning into it as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, and my mother was a vision of false happiness, clapping her hands together to muster up any last scraps of enthusiasm and rattling on about how the Romans invented underfloor heating. I was staring off towards the horizon again. The adult and child had made progress and were almost in proper view. I could now see that it was a woman, and although the child had an anorak on with the hood up, I was guessing from the way it was skipping and staying close to the woman that it was a little girl. Someone to play with, I thought. That would be a welcome distraction. And the other thing the Romans loved eating, rattled on my mother, was dormice. They used to roll them in poppy seeds and roast them, and sometimes eat them with swans. "Hello," said the woman as she and her daughter approached. "Got cold all of a sudden, hasn't it?" "Yes," said my mother, delighted to be able to chat to someone who wasn't having a nervous breakdown. "Though I think it's sure going to rain. That sky's looking very ominous." The child, sniffing me out like a truffle, came up and stood staring at my hair. "I used to have long hair," she said, "but then I got scabs and they had to cut my hair off." I didn't have a response to that, so instead I said, "Let's play Romans," and scampered off to stand in a small inlet in the wall. "We have to pretend we're the Roman soldiers," I explained, "and anyway, anyone who comes here has to be sent away, unless we know them. And watch out for the crows because they eat eyes." "Your hair is lovely," said the girl, still staring. "I've got a comb in my pocket. Let me comb it because you need to look smart when you're a Roman soldier." "All right then," I said, noticing the jagged tufts of new growth hidden under her anorak. The girl reached into her pocket and produced a small pink plastic comb. Taking a length of my hair in her hand, she drew the comb through it, gently at first because it was tangled from the wind. But as the weathered knots came out, the comb cut through my hair like knife through butter. Because we had run ahead and hidden in a small carved-out section of the wall, we were unnoticed by the adults. But as they drew level, the girl's mother let out a small cry. "Lucy," she said, surging towards her hand and pulling it away from my hand. "What did I say to you about not touching people's hair? You haven't been using that comb, have you?" Lucy stared down at the floor and said nothing. "She did comb my hair," I said, pulling up my anorak hook to prevent any further intrusions. "With a comb." "Give it here, please," said Lucy's mother, holding a hand out. Lucy, with great reluctance, handed her mother the comb, a few long strands of my blonde hair still attached to it. Taking me by the shoulder, Lucy's mother gave me a penetrating once-over, patted me twice, and said, "I'm sure you'll be fine, don't worry." I had no idea what she was talking about, but as I gazed up at her, there was something nagging at the back of my mind. I'd seen her before. "Oh, Jesus Christ," said a voice suddenly to our left. It was Tim. "Uncle Tim," shouted Lucy. "Oh no!" "No, it's not the big-breasted woman with the tiny garden." "Oh, Uncle Tim," shouted Lucy, scampering over to him. "Uncle Tim," said Jenny, bewildered. And then I remembered. "Mummy," I shouted, running to my mother. "That's the lady Tim was kissing." "Oh my gosh, no." "Oh, Jesus Christ," said Tim again. Because if there ever was a time that a man needed divine intervention, it was now. My father had his head in his hands. Brenda was standing with her mouth hanging open, and Jenny, in all her emaciated glory, was striding towards the woman with a raised hand. With the wind howling around them, Jenny slapped the woman full on the cheek. Oh gosh. The woman cried out and bent down to her left, clasping her face as she stumbled. Tim, desperate and with anger raging from his eyes, scrambled to the wall, grabbed a loose and hefty rock from its top and ran at Jenny's, arms aloft. My father, realising that murder was about to be committed, leapt at Tim and brought him down with a rugby tackle. We stood. He's going to haul a rock at her. We stood dumbstruck as the two of them rolled down the incline and came to an undignified heap at the bottom. "What are you doing?" screamed my father. "Are you mad? That's a bloody heritage site. You can't take rocks out of it and throw them about." "Never mind that feckin' wall," yelled Jenny. "He was trying to kill me. And who's this bitch? And what the feck is she doing here?" My mother, sensing that ugly scenes were about to cascade around us, gripped me by the hand. "You come with me, Emma," she said sharply. "Let's go and sit in the car." And as I was dragged away, I watched over my shoulder as the ascending crisis. At the ascending crisis, "He told me you were in a wheelchair," shouted the woman, gesturing pointlessly Jenny's legs. "And the lesson from you to learn, Emma," my mother muttered as we tripped over grassy clumps in our haste, "is that men cannot be trusted." "Even Daddy?" I asked, because that needed to be clarified. "No, Daddy's all right," said my mother, but then added, "but only just." Coincidence or another twist of holiday god's dagger? Miserable happenstance must have brought separate lives colliding with our holiday at the epicentre. As I was sat with my mother in the car and watched Tim and the blonde woman and Lucy wailing behind her, came screaming into the parking lot. There was a lot of shouting and gesticulating, and Tim had the beaten expression of a man whose life was now beyond his control. They had slammed themselves into the woman's car, where more shouting had taken place before screeching off, no doubt, to shout a bit more in the living room at the end of the long garden. Moments later, Jenny, weeping, limp and held up by my father, was presented like a broken kite at my mother's window. "Oh," Jenny moaned, shuddering. "Oh, oh, oh, oh." My mother got out, embraced her friends and helped her over to her own car, where they then sat. Jenny retching with misery, Dad got in the car with me. "Bloody hell," he said, exhausted. "What a thing to happen. Unbelievable. Don't worry. What are the chances? Unbelievable." Everyone was shell-shocked. Jenny, having been emotionally patched up by Mother, made her way home resolute that her life was only temporarily shattered. Like a phoenix, she would rise again, happy in the knowledge that her soon-to-be ex-husband was now shacked up with some tart. Well, she was free to do whatever she damn well pleased. My mother, drained and spent, slumped into the car and put her hand over her eyes. "Just once," she pleaded. "Just once. Can we have a holiday where nothing happens?" "Fat chance," said my father. We drove on. I think I'm going to leave it there at the end of that part chat. I think that, first of all, lot of the F-bombs going off in that. Lot of the bar steward words. I should have changed the word to bar steward. You would have known what I meant. Apologies for the language. If you're offended by language, I do apologise. I don't read this ahead. Like I said, I read it along with you. So, but, oh my gosh, can you imagine that she turns up at the very same place they are? And how cheeky is that, Tim, eh? He is a cheeky bar steward for, asking Tony to take her around her house. Well, he had a quick fumble and what have you, and then thought, "Oh yeah, let's go get some fish and chips." That's our adventure at Hadrian's Wall and also the men's club in Newcastle. yeah, where Brenda was not going to let that get in her way. She was going to make her point. Chat, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe for me. Share if you're having trouble with your notifications, as I have been, and you click all, but you're still not getting them. I suggest that you go into your YouTube settings, you click on channel settings, you click on, notifications, then you should click on channel settings, and then you will see all of your channels you're subscribed to. And to my bemusement, my channels that I thought were actually ticked as all on YouTube, when you can only click like and subscribe and then click all, were muted, or they were not ticked that end. So I went through each and every one of them, and I ticked the ones that I wanted, and since that day I have been receiving all my notifications. So I hope that helps you, and I hope it manages to get your notifications to you. Always keep an eye on the community post. I'll always put things up there as well. Thank you, chat, for being here with Welsh Lady today. It was a lovely read, and quite amusing. Sorry for the false start, but I'm sure that you'd have had a good laugh at my dodgy brain anyway. So I shall see you again soon, chat. Take care now. Go and have a nice cuppa. Ta-da!